Guys, this is Mikro. I wanted to do a quick reaction to the balance of power changes that are going to be coming for the monthly patch shortly. First off, the major thing that affects every single class in the game is an additional health is going to be added to your base HP. This is inherently a big buff to some things that a lot of people don't think about, like the actual health amulet perk scales off your max HP. That's off your base health. The other big thing that it affects too is ice block. That actual heal, if you run the heal, is going to be increased. The actual amount of HP in your tomb is also going to be increased, but that would be increased according to max HP, not necessarily base HP, as well as a few other perks that are able to interact with that base HP, which is just going to overall make the game feel a little bit tankier. This is coming from the actual accidental change where where the health buff and the base HP were introduced at the start of the patch, and then people realized it was actually felt pretty good. I think this makes sense given the kind of power creep of some of the weapons in the game. You kind of need that extra HP now, and it's not necessarily because the weapons themselves got a ton better. I think it's mostly because people have access to more BIS pieces now and are just generally dealing more damage, and it feels like that extra HP threshold is kind of needed to survive some of the common tendencies in the meta. And I think some of those things are as well just kind of bug oriented. Like there's a lot of like weird bugs with abilities hitting twice that probably need to be looked at, but overall this is a like really positive change. The 150 and 300 dex attributes got swapped. This is a really big change, and I really like this change. The 300 dex attribute isn't as insane as the 150 bonus for most classes, but the 150 dex felt like a must-have thing for most kind of disruptor melee-oriented classes, just so that you could spam dodge over and over again and be able to avoid most of the damage in the game with very little consequence. This is going to make it so that people that want to go for that dodge mechanic where you're able to dodge a lot of things that are incoming to you, are going to have to make a sacrifice in terms of their damage output because they're going to have to put all their stats into Dex, which is inherently going to lower the damage of some disruptor oriented classes as well as dive oriented classes that will not be able to get that threshold anymore. This is inherently going to make it feel a little bit easier to play around those kind of melee disruptive characters like the great swords that are running really rampant right now, and I think it's going to lower their power level significantly, since most of those weapons are typically run in a format where they go for either 150 strength, 150 dex, or 200 strength, 150 dex, and the rest put in a con. So I think this is a really awesome change. The only weird thing to this is there is a build in the game that's like a 50 con variant, and I think that might gain a little bit more popularity after this change, where people will try 300 dex, 150 strength, or maybe even 200 strength, and basically no con. And that build is actually weirdly good in certain circumstances, but generally is not super powerful. I do think that build is very powerful in the kind of small scale areas where that player is not typically heavily focused. So you think OPR, that build might be a little bit slept on next patch. You think about 3v3, that build might be pretty good. But most aspects of the game, I think this is a very good change, and overall decreases the power level of some of those kind of great sword oriented disruptors. Fortify buffs are also not going to count towards invigorated punishment bonus. Kind of a nod to me at this point, because I've been preaching that since the changes to Fortify came out, where stuff was not scaled correctly, so that Fortify perks at times are considered to be a negative effect. Seems like they don't want to increase the effectiveness of Fortify across the board, and instead are taking the approach of just removing that from invigorated punishment. I think this is a fair change, just kind of needed. I don't think this makes it, based off analysis that I've done, that invigorated punishment is not really run perk anymore. Seems like it's still a really good perk to run, but this is going to make it so that there isn't this weird aspect with Fortify where you kind of need to commit everything to Fortify in order for it to be good. So there's no longer this aspect where it's like, hey, you need to run 5 Shirking Fort, otherwise you should be going for Elemental Aversion. Now you can do like kind of a balance if you want to. You could do 2 Shirking Fort, 3 Elemental Aversion. There's not really a big deal from that once this goes out. As well as it makes some attribute perks like on the Blunderbuss where you gain Fortify every time you do cast an ability. That perk is actually usable now. It was not usable for a decent amount of time here because it was actually just a straight up debuff for every single class if you used one ability. So it did not really feel worth it to use, and now it seems like it could be in a good direction to be used again. Overall, This is like really, really good for blunderbuss in particular. It's a good thing for life staff. Light players that are getting fortify no longer have to worry about that aspect where it's like, hey, my fortify actually doesn't make me any tankier. It's still effectively not going to make you very tankier compared to what you would be before, just because the value from the fortifies is not super significant, but it's going to be enough to actually feel a difference this time around, which I think is a really, really good thing. For Sword and Shield, Achilles' heel got changed to give a rend instead of a slow. This is the kind of light, spammy auto attack from the sword. I think this is a really good change overall. There is a kind of a concept of these next coming changes where they are decreasing or kind of removing the values of slows. I think this makes sense with the kind of passive freedom negator. That doesn't seem to be working versus slows, but works versus roots as far as I'm aware. So that kind of has turned the game into a very root focused game into a very slow focused game, which is kind of weird to think about. But a slow on a light player effectively makes it so a light dodge doesn't really go anywhere. And that aspect alone makes it so that slows are super, super potent and are super, super powerful in certain aspects of the game. And Achilles' heel is one of those kind of aspects that's like, hey, you have a very spammable slow attack that's making it so light players can escape from swords and shields. And then once they use their movement, you can match your movement with the SNS. So I think this is overall a very positive change for the general game as a whole. In terms of SNS, this is a nerf. Some people have talked about running an SNS on point that's just spamming light autos to apply rend. I don't think that's like really a significant thing that's gonna be super potent or like very good, but I think there is a possibility that someone can make a kind of whirling blade build work with this kind of light spammy attack as well. You have two major sources of Brent. Whirling Blade, when you're surrounded by it and you hit three more people and you have the perk on your weapon, does an additional 50% base damage. For reference, that's like you're light. You go from heavy to light damage twice, and then you add on top of that like a medium damage bonus. Like it basically makes it so Whirling Blade like hits like a truck, even if you're in heavy or if you're in medium. And you don't really need to be in light to get value out of that Whirling Blade. I could very easily see that becoming a slept on kind of sleeper build for the up and coming patch. I don't know exactly how it would be run, but I think that there is a possibility that for that kind of oriented build to be run on point. Do I think it's better than Great Axe Warhammer? Probably not, but I think it's very interesting and could be run on point. There's also a big change with spears, particularly with Cyclone. The Cyclone's slow got reduced from 30% to 15%. I actually wait. Now this is it got reduced from 50% to 30%. There's a typo on my notes. But overall, like this is very good. Cyclone feels overtuned. The other change to Cyclone is Leeching Cyclone limits the activations per use. I like the idea behind this. I would like to see it applied to other classes across the game. Like in particular, Warhammer has a lot of AOE heal oriented effects. I think that that should be kind of made consistent, where those are like capped at like say 3 to 5 in total, and that will in turn just make it so that you can't, or those weapons or those what do you call it, those options that are like kind of a must-have run for those classes. I would like to see a world where people are trying more unique things, and for some of those classes, like Path of Destiny is like literally like a half a HP bar heal if you throw it down on the point. Most people will call that pad, or you could throw it towards the healers and you don't heal as much, but you can disrupt the healers. I would like to see it so that those kind of abilities aren't basically a full heal, because then it just makes the game feel a little bit more fair from a damage dealing and tanking perspective, where if people's HP bar is going down, it's actually going down. It's not going to be going up and down, up and down, up and down, like kind of crazy, unless they're getting healed by a life staff. So overall, like really, really good change. Cyclone seemed like it was a bit overtuned for this current patch. I know a lot of people have been trying that out as of recently. The only thing that they changed to make it like overtuned with quotes is they improved the hit reg, which was needed. And with that bug being kind of fixed, everyone kind of gravitated to running Cyclone because it was just doing a lot, and it makes sense to tone it down. Do I think this is too much? Not really. I don't think a lot of people actually run the Leeching Cyclone as much as the devs think they do. But the slow is definitely the aspect that needed to be looked at, and they're looking at that, and that's in the right direction. For bow, they did not fix this, but they're thinking about fixing it in the near future, where the elemental damage part of a bow, so if you were to put a int gem in there, does not is not affected by damage fall. So that's a tactic that bows have been using to get around both physical aversion as well as just doing more damage, which is why a lot of lifestyle players have moved on to be using elemental aversion, which you can get the best gear basically for free right now at the current event.
And overall, that's just kind of it shaped a own like little mini meta for the healers and like what they needed to focus on in terms of gear to avoid damage. That's being fixed in season 3, so all the healers will go back to running a version and not being shot by bows. But that's just something that's kind of noteworthy. In the meanwhile, that if you're a bow player, you probably want to take care or take advantage of that mechanic while you can. Blunderbuss, they are making it so that you can't OTK, or I guess OTK isn't the right word, but you can't one-shot combo people anymore by animation canceling abilities. There's going to be a fair number of people that get exposed after this change, and a fair number of people that quit after this change, and it's just for the better. There's no reason for that kind of mechanic to be inherent in the game where it's like a you can't outplay like a CC into one-shot effect. That does not belong in this game, and might belong in other games, but doesn't really belong in New World. So overall, very very good. And lastly, but not least by any means, detonate is no longer going to be able to crit. This is a huge deal. I don't know if I could like kind of oversell how big of a deal this is because crits with detonate were ignoring resilient for some reason. So basically, every time someone crit with the detonate, they were just doing tons of damage, like an extra. Well, I guess not tons of damage, but they're doing like an extra 20% damage flat, which is a lot. And then you throw that on top of Greatsword, where they have a guaranteed crit, and you throw that on top of some other bugs where detonate can actually multi-hit people if you play around mechanic correctly, which I don't want to go into. But there's certain situations where detonator's just 100 0ing people and there's not a lot of counterplay, and this is going to help that a lot. That being said, I would like to see the devs address the multi-hit issue at some point because it affects a lot of abilities in the game. I don't want to talk about how that's done or anything because that is just uh, gonna force their hand, and I don't know if they have time to fix it, but I would like to see that issue be resolved in the near future because it's very annoying to play around in terms of a point perspective where you can't really tell when people are using what abilities, and you can just kind of get 100 owed, and you look back at the damage when you 0.25 it, and it's like, oh, that guy hit me twice, and he hit me for 10,000 damage or something stupid like that, and it's like, okay, I can't really do anything about that. So it's just like kind of created like a mini meta of sorts where people just nuke the point and there's nothing in terms of counterplay for that activity. Unlike previous patches where it felt a little bit less consistent to do that, or maybe people just weren't aware of the mechanic. So I would like to see that kind of get fixed so people just aren't getting 100 owed. But overall, a very very good patch in terms of PvP, especially for like a small changes to PvP. These are going to be really impactful. I think the biggest changes by far are the health, 150 dex switch, and the what do you call it? The heart rune detonate one. Detonate, I still imagine will be meta. I think Detonate will be the meta heart room until they decide to make it so that Detonate doesn't work off your base damage attributes. So if you have Empower and Detonate does damage off that Empower, I think once they get rid of that, Detonate won't be used. But until they do that, Detonate will just be the meta ultimate for every single Bruiser, every single Greatsword, every single Fire Staff in the game. Until that is addressed, because all other abilities have a transform effects, which removes all your active buffs, and in the process of that, you can't boost the damage significantly, unlike with Detonate, where you can boost the damage significantly. You combo that with other people, and it just leads to entire clump wiping scenarios because your Detonate is a giant cylinder in the center of the point that's radiating around, just destroying everyone near the point. There are situations right now where people are able to win a 5v20 on a point fight, which has kind of shaped the whole meta to be a little bit less about point and a little bit more about off point, and then heavily diving point, and then getting back off point, because if you stay too close together, you will just get blown up. So, weird mini meta that's going to come because of some bugs, but overall, very good changes, and I'm looking forward to see what comes about in season 3 when those notes get released in not the near future, but future here. And I'll see you guys later.